Good morning, everyone. I think we'll get started. Excuse me. Clear my throat. My name is Gretchen Musicant, and I'm a member of the Westminster's Social Justice team. The Social Justice Forums are built around a common theme, and this program year, the theme is Moving from Understanding to Transformation, Affecting Change Together, Guided by God. Through these forums, we want to explore capabilities we need to build and norms that we need to examine in order to effectively participate in transformation with our community. This morning, we're pleased to welcome Betty Folliard, a Westminster member, the ERA Minnesota founder, and a former legislator. She will give a refresher course on the ERA's history, its current significance, and arguments for or against the ERA, and provide a progress report on the Minnesota State ERA Ballot Initiative before the Minnesota Legislature when it convenes this February. We will have time for questions, but we would prefer that you save up those questions till after Betty has given us all that content. So before we get started, just a couple items. For those who are attending in person, please raise your hand. We'll bring you a microphone. We like to use the microphone so that those on the live stream can hear you. And then for those attending on live stream, we will have someone monitoring. We do have someone monitoring, and so submit your comments in the chat, and we will raise those for you. So as part of our ongoing effort to promote respectful conversations, we have developed some guidelines, and so I hope that you'll take a minute to read this slide. And then as you ask questions, think about your voice and using curiosity, being fairly concise with your questions so that we can get some answers. Be generous in your listening for what we are hearing, and then honoring the image of God. So let's before we get going, let's start with a short prayer. Let us pray. Holy One, God of justice, breathe into us today a spirit of curiosity and humility. Help us engage with mindfulness, following the lead of voices from our community. Guide our speech and our self-awareness, so we may honor the divine in all people. Amen. So now, please let us all join Betty to the podium.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning, everybody, and welcome everybody online and in person here today. I want to thank you for coming. I'm Betty Folliard, former state representative and founder of ERA Minnesota. We've been going for how many years? 14 years now? Let's see. I'm going to try to advance that. There we go. What is ERA Minnesota? Well, we are an organization of insurgents. That's what I call us. We are activists. We are an all-volunteer organization that will be entering our 10th year in 2024. So what do? We educate, we organize, we activate for equality for all, and all means all. So we build coalitions and recruit and activate activists to get the Equal Rights Amendment passed. And we survey to identify ERA certified candidates in November elections. And we work with legislators to advance the federal and state ERAs. Now, gotta figure out where to touch here. So what am I gonna talk about here today? Some of you, it's review. For some of you, this is the first time ever you've heard an Equal Rights Amendment presentation. So I'm going to give a brief history, and then we'll sweep into today. So what is the ERA? What is it? A brief history of it. Why do we need it? Arguments for and against it. And why now? And then next steps and how to take action. Let's just take a moment to look at this photo of Lady Justice at the top of the outside of the U.S. Supreme Court in Washington, D.C. The U.S. Constitution started by stating, "We the people." But not all people were included, not all in this foundational document. Unequal treatment and long-term patterns of bias still exist. And we are the only developed nation in the world that still doesn't have an Equal Rights Amendment clause in our U.S. Constitution. Isn't that amazing? So, the Equal Rights Amendment, what is it? We're going to get right into it. The great majority of Americans think that men and women should have equal rights. They just did another poll a month ago, the Celinda Lake and the Lake Research, that said 75 to 85% of Americans believe we should have equal rights. But many think we already have these rights. We're going to talk about that, okay? So we're going to start with the federal ERA. The federal ERA, we're going to talk about two ERAs because we have a federal ERA and we have a state ERA because we have a federal constitution and a state constitution, right? So we'll be talking about the two constitutions, but first the U.S. Constitution and then the Constitution of the state of Minnesota. Neither constitution includes women, LGBTQIA folks, and intentionally marginalized and minoritized communities in its full protections. These are the 24 words. Equality of rights under the law shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex. Easy, 24 words, right? Easy. It's only been 100 years. It was let me go back a little bit about the history both of our country and the ERA, because we want to go backwards before we go forwards. In 1701, English common law came to the colonies. The early settlers and the founders and the authors of the Constitution, that's the law that was covering the United States. And there was a thing called femme covert. Ever heard of it? How many people have heard of femme covert? One. For women, it meant that being covered by their fathers, husbands, brothers, and even sons, a married woman was a femme covert who could not own property or make contracts or vote, etc. And single women and girls were dependent upon their relatives for all decisions that were made. There are obviously, there's still about 12 classical patriarchies in the world, and there are still countries that adhere to this. We've moved on. And in 1787, of course, the Constitution was written, and colonial women were well aware of the injustices and of fighting for independence, and yet not receiving equal rights. So when John Adams rode off to write the Constitution, his wife, Abigail Adams, wrote off to her husband and said, "Remember the ladies and include them." And he failed to do so. Moving on. So another, 75 years or so pass, and finally Lucretia Mott and Elizabeth Cady Stanton put their heads together, two top suffragists whose names are known, and two of our heroes in this country. In the 1840s, women's suffrage and abolition of slavery were closely linked, as women and enslaved Africans had been excluded from full rights of citizenship, and many of the abolitionists then became suffragists. And they worked together to gain rights to leading up to the Civil War. And then the first Women's Rights Convention was born. Where was it born? It was born in Seneca Falls, New York, right? And here we are, in front of you is the Declaration of Sentiments that Elizabeth Cady Stanton wrote in 1848 that declared that all men and women are created equal. They only had 9 days to put together this convention. 9 days. Think of coming by buggies, pony and buggies, and they got 400 people there. I mean, I'm just astounded at that. I was just there in July. And they've officially adopted the Seneca Falls Convention in July of 1848, and it was signed by 68 women and 32 men. One of those men, you might recall, was Frederick Douglass. Frederick Douglass, who ran for Vice President of the United States under the ticket that held the first woman running for president, Victoria Woodhull. And just so you know, I've got Frederick Douglass and Susan B. Anthony. I'm creating a thread from the beginning of this country to today. And Susan B. Anthony is interwoven in this thread. So you'll hear why later. But Susan B. Anthony, a great abolitionist who became a suffragist, would invite Frederick Douglass to stay at her home every time he came to Rochester, New York. Excuse me. They were great friends. And if you look at her home, if you ever visit in Rochester and you go to her home, across the street is a park. And in the park is a life-size statue of Susan B. Anthony and Frederick Douglass sitting across the table having tea and having a conversation, because he came to her house many times and stayed at her home. They had a little bit of a rift once the 14th, 15th, and 16th Amendment were, 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment, all having to do with enslaved individuals and freeing African-American men. And all of a sudden, words were said, and there was a bit of a split in a tear in the fabric of this wonderful coalition that had been formed. And one of the things I say about our founding mothers in this country is that, just like our founding fathers, is that they weren't perfect people. They made mistakes one at a time, just like you and I. And yet we can bow to history and not be bound by it. So think about that in these terms. Now, so from 1848 till after the Civil War, the long struggle for the vote for women ensued. And, the defeat of women's rights, the 14th, 15th Amendments was crushing. And 60 years of coalition building and marching ensued. For the next 50 years, women fought for the right to vote. 50 years they marched. Here they are marching in 1913, right? And now we come to 1923, when some women finally won the right to vote. At last, in 1920, women gained the 19th Amendment. It was passed and fully ratified, and it became the first and only mention of women's rights in the U.S. Constitution even today, okay? Native American women still couldn't vote. Jim Crow terror had reduced African American suffrage to a near halt in most of the South and some of the northern states too. But it was a big success for those impacted, including my grandma. My mother was 5 years old when my grandma got to vote. So from 1923 to 1972, we're going to jump another 50 years. Women marched. You see them marching there? That's from 1920s. That's when the Equal Rights Amendment, 1923, was first introduced into Congress. It was first introduced in the First Presbyterian Church of Seneca Falls, New York. I always take great pride in that when I think it was the Presbyterians who got to hear it first. And I got to speak at the Alice Paul pulpit where she actually introduced the Equal Rights Amendment. And it was introduced in Congress by Susan B. Anthony's nephew, Congressman Daniel Reed Anthony Jr. So the thread continues, right? So now, the first wording was a little different from what it is today. It started off as the Lucretia Mott Amendment. It was changed in 1943 to read, "Equality of rights under the law shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex." That's today's language at the federal level. Then there was more marching, another 50 years, okay? We're still marching. And the federal ERA was approved by Congress in 1972, sent out for ratification. It was stopped along the way. It had a 7-year deadline. It was increased by 3 years. And here's our friend, President Jimmy Carter, signing the extension of the ERA in 1979 for 3 more years. We were given 10 years to pass women's rights in this country, 10 years. And then it was put dormant, okay? By the way, Jimmy Carter didn't need to sign this. In fact, he had no business signing it because it was a resolution, but the closer the ERA gets, the more people want to touch it. That happened this year here in this state when Governor Tim Walz signed our resolution to Congress to pass the Equal Rights Amendment, the 28th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. He did not need to pass a resolution to Congress. Doesn't require his signature, but it got that far through the House and the Senate, and he wanted to touch it. It's an honor. So, it was stopped in 1982 by, Phyllis Schlafly, the Eagle Forum, the insurance industry, the healthcare industry, a few other business industries, etc., who really didn't want to confer rights on more people because it was to their advantage, and they could make more money. So I'm going to just stop for a second and say, by the way, the ERA is bipartisan. It's nonpartisan, in fact. It was first introduced by a Republican, Susan B. Anthony's nephew. It was supported by every Republican president and first lady up until Reagan, and it was added to the Democratic platform after it was put on the Republican platform. It's been removed from the Republican platform, still on the Democratic platform. Now, we're going to look back. Here we were in 1923 in front of the First Presbyterian Church in Seneca Falls, New York, when it was first signed. And here's today. I'm over here. And over here, in the middle, is the governor of New York and the Attorney General, Tish James. Some of you know Letitia James, her name. And I want you to look closely at this picture because if you look closely, you will see this is a wildly diverse, intersectional a group of folks from all over the country. And these are the leaders. And 60% of them are young people. 60% are young people, okay? That's where we are today. Because who's going to be most impacted by the Equal Rights Amendment? It's not most of us in this room, right? It's not. It's young people. It's Black, Indigenous, Latinx, Asian, women of color. It's the folks who are most marginalized, most affected by discrimination here in this country. Okay, before, there's Alice Paul and Crystal Eastman. Crystal Eastman with a couple friends. Crystal Eastman, by the way, became a founder of the ACLU, I can't even say it fast, but the ACLU, and the ACLU didn't support the ERA for a couple of decades, but they do now. Thank you. And now here's the after. These are our leaders. These are our leaders today. And I'm going to start from here. This is my friend Zakiya Thomas. She is the head of ERA Coalition, which is a coalition of over 300 organizations across the United States, very diverse, very intersectional, inclusive. And she's also, I believe, an adjunct professor at Georgetown. The next one is U.S. Senator Kristen Gillibrand, who is one of our chief authors. The next one is my good friend, Kamala Lopez. Kamala is the founder and president, CEO of Equal Means Equal. And Equal Means Equal, many of you have come across them. They are out of California, one of our two major national organizations. One's on the East Coast, one's on the West Coast. Then we have Ayanna Pressley, Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley, who is also a chief author of one of our bills. Then we have Ben Cardin, Senator Cardin, U.S. Senator Cardin is a chief author. And then we have Congresswoman Cori Bush, who is also chief author. So we've got 2 bills in each house, so 4 bills, right? 2 bills in the Senate, 2 bills in the House. And this year, my friends Ayanna Pressley and Cori Bush created the first ever ERA caucus in Congress. And just so you know, within months, it is now the 3rd largest caucus in the U.S. Congress. So we got some major sheroes here. Okay, why do we still need the ERA? I'm going to whip through this part. Pervasive issues of sex discrimination, workforce sex discrimination, gender pay gap, sexual violence, unequal access to health care. COVID pandemic set us back. The overturning of Roe v. Wade and the Dobbs decision was the first time that the rescission of rights of the majority of Americans happened since the 1800s. So gender pay gap, I can talk about it. In Minnesota, women make on average 81% to a man's dollar in Minnesota. This is here now, with much, much larger inequities for Black, Indigenous, Latinx, Asian women, and women of color. And 2/3 of minimum wage earners and tipped workers are women. And the rate of U.S. Senate seniors who live in poverty is 2/3 higher for women than men. And also unequal pay and workplace sexual harassment are strongly linked. So sexual harassment and discrimination in the workforce, we talked about a little bit. Sexual violence, nationwide, 81% of women and 43% of men reported some sexual harassment in the workforce. And 1 in 4 women will be raped or sexually assaulted in this country in their lifetime. And less than 1% of rapes will ever lead to felony convictions. So equal access to health care is an issue, more of an issue for American Indian, Alaskan Native women, Black women, Indigenous women, et cetera, et cetera. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about the arguments for and against the Equal Rights Amendment, really against, and then we'll get to the for, okay? Argument number 1, that the U.S. Constitution, the 14th Amendment, the Equal Protection Clause, includes protection on the basis of sex or against sex discrimination. That's not right. And Justices Scalia and Ginsburg have weighed in on this. The late Justice Scalia said once, certainly the Constitution does not require sex discrimination on the basis of sex. The only issue is whether it prohibits it. It doesn't. And of course, you know that RBG once said, if I could choose an amendment to add to the Constitution, it would be the Equal Rights Amendment. I would like to see my granddaughters, when they pick up the Constitution, to see the notion that women and men are persons of equal stature. I'd like them to see that is a basic principle of our society. We'd like to see that too. Would you? Honestly, we'd like to see that too, and that's what we're doing. You think of the Constitution, that should reflect our principles, our values, and it doesn't. So argument number 2, we have plenty of protective laws. We don't need a constitutional amendment. Well, laws are only as strong as the constitutional language behind them. If it's not there, it doesn't work. And they can be unenforced, changed, or repealed in the courts and in Congress. And ERA would give the same scrutiny to sex discrimination as the Constitution gives to race, religion, and national origin. So argument number 3, the ERA could expand abortion rights. Well, just so you know, there are 27 states that have state ERAs right now, and New York will be the 28th because it's already on their ballot for 2024. And no state ERAs have ever been used to expand abortion access. However, state ERAs have protected existing laws, and we have all the existing laws we need here in Minnesota for full reproductive health care, including abortion. And some states currently are now going back, some of these states that have the ERA going back and trying to shoehorn reproductive rights into it so that it's explicit. We're going to talk about that because that's where we're at right now, and that's what we are doing right now as we create our state ERA. Remember, Minnesota does not have a state ERA. We ratified the federal ERA in 1973, but we don't have a state ERA. So, argument number 4, women, that the ERA would force women into the military and put them in combat positions. However, we're already 16% of the military. We're already serving in combat positions, not always getting the same pay, but we're there. So why the ERA now? It's because our Constitution does not protect the kind of unfair discrimination felt mostly by women and intentionally minoritized and marginalized communities. Everybody has the same right to the same rights, and it needs to be in our Constitution. So that's a picture of the ERA ratification federally. You can see that all the states that are in pink and yellow are ratified states. The United States is out of step with the world on gender equality. We're only 1 in 7 countries in the world who have not ratified CEDAW. CEDAW is the UN treaty, Women's Rights Treaty. It defines discrimination on the basis of sex. It has been signed by 187 countries in the world, nations in the world. And the nations who have not signed this pact are Sudan, South Sudan, Somalia, Iran, Tonga, and Palau, 2 tiny Pacific nations, and the United States of America. Now here we are with the state ERAs. You can see all the state ERAs that are in blue and yellow, dark blue and yellow, have a state ERA. The light blue ones are working to put a state ERA in their state constitution, and there's Minnesota. We're doing it. So the proposed Minnesota state ERA, now we're getting to the nitty-gritty because this is the work we're doing right now. And it is not your grandma's ERA. It is equality under the law shall be abridged, the equality under the law shall not be abridged or denied by this state or any of its cities, counties, or other political subdivisions on account of race, color, creed, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, age, disability, ancestry, or national origin. This is the newly proposed language that passed through the Senate this year, 43 to 23, in a wildly bipartisan manner. Surprised us all, wildly bipartisan. It was first introduced, this language was first introduced by my friend, Senator Pat Spearman last year, and it passed the Nevada legislature. It passed the legislature, went to the public, passed the public by 58% of the population. It got more votes than any candidate in the election, okay? Wildly bipartisan. So the new Minnesota state ERA ballot is multi-generational, it is inclusive, it is intersectional, and here it is again, just to ensure that rights won't be rescinded by future legislatures, to state explicitly that Minnesota state constitution protects equal legal rights for all, and all means all, and to make clear that in Minnesota, discrimination is prohibited. Now, just a quick snapshot of our Constitution. It was written in 1857. the same year as the Dred Scott decision by the U.S. Supreme Court. Look that one up if you don't know the Dred Scott. It gives you an idea of where we were at the time, okay? Not acceptable. And where we need to get to is to put our values into the current Constitution, to look at the next 7 generations, okay? Why we need it, I just mentioned that. So the proposed Minnesota ERA will constitutionalize, basically, it's constitutionalizing our Minnesota Human Rights Act, right? It's got the same language in it. You'll see, race, disability, national origin, sex, blah, 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 okay? The difference is that Minnesota, that is a law. The Human Rights Act is a law, and that law can be changed or rescinded by future legislatures. Let's not do that, okay? Let's move forward. Now, our big news for ERA Minnesota is this year we passed our resolution to Congress to enact the 28th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. ERA Minnesota was the first state to write, first organization of any state to write such a resolution. And this year, 6 states passed it. Basically saying that it's time for Congress to do their job and enact the Equal Rights Amendment. President Biden has stated on various occasions now he supports the ERA, he wants Congress to do it. He also has an action step. His action step is that he can pick up the phone and call the U.S. archivist and tell her to publish the ERA and throw out the Trump Bar memo that is holding it back right now. It was that Trump Bar memo was written 2 weeks before the final state ratified. Knowing that it was going to ratify, they stopped it, and it's still in place, and it's still holding it up. So everybody's got an action step they can take. President, the Congress, Minnesota State Legislature, and us. So today, the State ERA Ballot Initiative is Senate File 37. It passed through the Minnesota Senate, as mentioned. It was pulled off the floor on the last day of session when it was on the calendar for further review. So now we're going through the further review. And that further review is to make sure that we have garnered enough coalitions of organizations and entities like the faith community to move forward as one body saying, we demand equal rights in our state constitution. That's what this is about right now. And so it wanted to make sure that those protections are there for transgender folks in our community, because the transgender individuals are in the eye of the target right now. They are getting all of the pushback. And it wants to make sure that we go from implicit reproductive rights protections to explicit. And so that's what we're doing now with a roundtable of attorneys working with Gender Justice, who has assembled a roundtable of attorneys to massage the language and make sure that it fits into our Minnesota Constitution. And we are working with Planned Parenthood. We've partnered with these 2 organizations right now, and Planned Parenthood is doing polling and research. That will all come back to us in late December, and then we will see how we can all work together moving forward. Each organization has its own agenda, but we find where are our commonalities, because ultimately everybody has the same right to the same rights. I'm talking to a religious community right now, one that I happen to be a member of, and with pride. And I can say that my faith informs my politics, that I believe that we are all worthy in the eyes of God. And that's why I'm here. So, next steps. Oh yeah, next steps. We're going to be over at the legislature on the first day of session. and you all are invited to come. And everybody online is invited to come. And invite all your generations and all your friends. Let us know if you have organizations that need to have a presentation. We're happy to go out. We've got people farmed out across the state. This week it's in Rochester, not Rochester, Red Wing, and here, and St. Paul. And I was just up in Duluth. Various people have gone. I was in Wilmer. We've got something going on in Ely, Minnesota. You let us know. We're all over the state, okay? So what you can do, I recommend that you become a member of ERA Minnesota. I welcome you. I invite you to become a member, or just go to our website at eramn.org and sign up for our newsletter. You don't have to be a member to sign up for our newsletter. We always encourage donations. I've got to raise $100,000, so I always encourage donations. And get activated. If you want to be there and be talking to legislators, that's what you need to do. So to advocate for ERA, invite your family. By the way, Thanksgiving is coming up, right? Thanksgiving is a perfect time to talk about equal rights for all around the table, isn't it? No better time, right? Okay, so invite your family and friends to join us and speak up. Speak up in your networks, wherever you go. You know I do, right? You can too. You are empowered. I am deputizing every one of you to speak up about this, okay? And then contact your legislators. Right now they're still holding town hall meetings. It's a great way to raise your hand and say, what about the ERA? Are you going to champion it? We need you to champion it. So that's that. I want to just finish up by saying thank you. At the beginning, I should have pointed out were two of our chief authors, Representative Kali Herr and who was it? Representative Kali Herr and Representative Kristen Bonner. And in this picture here, you'll see two of our other chief authors right in the middle in front. That's Senator Mary Kunesh in the white, and next to her is Senator Sandy Pappas. Just know that we are on the right side of history. We won't take no for an answer, and we will prevail. Thank you, everybody. I look forward to your questions.
Hello, I have two questions. The first is, what's creed? And the second is, how many times has the Minnesota Constitution been changed or amended?
Great
and how
question.
often does that happen?
It's very rare. The second one is very rare, and I don't think it's happened in many years. I know that it was last updated in 1974, if that tells you something. And creed creed passed through Nevada, and so we took the language, but we're finding it problematic here because it's not defined in the Minnesota Human Rights Act. But let me give you kind of a rough definition of creed, which was what the basis for why we just said, okay, we'll throw it in there, see if it sticks. And religion is already about 6 times named in the Minnesota Constitution. So it's already named in the federal Constitution, and then the Minnesota Constitution has underscored it many times and given it additional weight. So it's well protected. It's more protected in the state than in the federal Constitution. So creed refers to a set of beliefs that people live by, okay? That's a very rough definition. And some religions have creeds, like some religions have like the Apostle Creed, etc. Some religions don't have creeds, like the Unitarian Universalists. They don't believe in creeds. Some groups have creeds and they don't have religion. And so it's difficult to just nail it down, but for many people, they live by certain creeds. And of course, a creed, probably the most universal creed, is the Golden Rule, which is in every religion and holds for people who are not religious, that do unto others as you will have them do unto you. And I think that's both questions. I can't give you more specifics on that. And by the way, that's Katie Cashman, who's running for Minneapolis City Council. Thanks for coming. Thank you for coming. Other questions? Any questions online, Phil? Oh, we got one here.
Well, I have a girlfriend who locally marches for this cause. And so she's talked to me about this also. And so to me, it's really hard to understand why Minnesota has taken all this time to get on board. I mean, this is like, it can't be true. I mean, you know, whenever in news programs they show liberal states, Minnesota's way up there above so many others, et cetera. So why has this taken so long? And the other thing I was going to say, isn't there something to the fact that the states, the 38 states that have ratified this since that 10-year period in the federal government has passed, their vote's nothing and will have to be redone again once another 5 or 10-year bill is put through the House or the Senate and federal?
So your second question first is no. If Congress enacts the Equal Rights Amendment, that's one way forward. If the president gets the archivist to certify or publish it, the archivist whose ministerial duty is to do so, then it moves forward. The only way that we would have to go back to the states is if we did it over again. And none of us want to start from scratch. We couldn't in this current environment. Now, your first question was, why is it so hard in Minnesota to get a state ERA? Just so you know, the state ERA has been introduced in Minnesota every year since 1983. So that's 40 years it's been introduced. Now, understanding that a lot of the folks who introduced it, really their heart wasn't in it. It was a majority, in fact, back then it was almost 100% men who say, oh yes, I support the ERA. There weren't warriors to fight this. And yes, we like it, we'll get there. But there's also a challenge to Minnesota. And this is why it's more difficult here to pass a state ERA than in most states. And that is that we have this law, which I don't know of any other state that has it, that says that the constitutional amendment, or a ballot initiative it's called, has to be approved by a majority of the voters voting in that election, but that if people don't mark the constitutional amendment, it's a no vote. And so that's a higher bar line. It's a no vote. So you know, now you've got to not just put out, do you want equality or not? You also have to say, now make sure you check the box. Don't walk into the ballot box and check your favorite president and walk out because you've just voted no on equality. And don't just vote for your favorite senator and walk out because you just voted no on equality. So we have, that's the challenge that any constitutional amendment has, and that's our job. That's why we have to form this massive coalition, including the faith communities, that says loud and clear, we're doing this thing, it's the right thing to do, and it makes you need to walk into that ballot box and check yes on equality. Does that make sense? It's more difficult here. That's the challenge. You know, some people, you haven't raised the issue of the 5 states that rescinded at the federal level, but just so you know, our constitutional experts have said that those 5 states do not count because there's nothing in the Constitution that allows for rescissions, and there were states that tried to rescind the 15th and 19th Amendments, and they were pushed back by the U.S. Supreme Court. So we have super precedent on that. Other questions? Any questions? Oh, yes, here we are. Yes.
It's just a follow-up question to what you just responded to. So when you look at the ballot box, because I'm a 100% voter on every election, so I just want to make sure I'm not missing anything, because usually I go through the check boxes and I can always pass that along as well. So what is the verbiage for that in order to not miss it so I can pass it on?
Right, and of course, it's not on this year's ballot, so you don't have to pass it on yet. Hopefully, it will be on the 2024 ballot. So we've got time, and it might get kicked out to the 2026 ballot, but we don't know yet. That's the timing. They can pass it through the legislature in 24 and either put it on the 24 or the 26 ballot that year. But so the language that we are proposing, it's going to get massaged a little bit, so we don't have it clear. But right now, it's equality under the law shall not be abridged or denied by this state, cities, counties, and other political subdivisions on account of race, color, creed, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity and expression, age, disability, ancestry, and national origin. And that is on those, you can get a bookmark that has that language on it, and also there's a card there. I also have some postcards there for people to sign and send to their legislators, and we really encourage you to do that. And if you need to know who your legislator is, ask me, okay? Did that answer your question? Good, thank you. Yes, Kay.
Thank you. How much support is this ERA you've been talking so eloquently and strongly about? How much support from faith communities in Minnesota? Also, a particular interest in the ACLU of Minnesota and the League of Women Voters in Minnesota. How much support is the ERA getting at this time? And
Thank you.
how to increase the support?
Yeah, well, basically, again, you have to be talking within your own networks. Kay is a former CEO of the ACLU in New York, so she knows something about the ACLU. But the ACLU here, we did meet with the ACLU, and initially they gave tepid support. They were then in the room in our group of attorneys, and we had a national ACLU lawyer in our attorney roundtable. So they are participating, they are helping, they are encouraging right now. And as for the League of Women Voters, they've been 100%. ACLU, I mean the Association of what is it? The American Association of University Women, 100%. These are strong folks. Women's March, Indivisible. We've got about 40 organizations on our website who are allies. We just picked up the JCA, the Jewish Community Action, and we have the Jewish what is it? JRLC. I'm forgetting. No, it's the National Jewish Women's Association. They've been working with us for a long period of time. I worked all the way up the process a few years ago to get the Presbyterians back on board, because Presbyterians had supported the Equal Rights Amendment back in the 70s, and of course when it went dormant, everybody walked away. But so I took it to, when I was a member of House of Hope Church in St. Paul, I took it to the session and then to the, I'm not going to get the order right, but the synod and the next level, and it got it ready, all poised for the General Assembly with a resolution, and then COVID hit. and the bottom fell out of everything. So that was kind of where we were on that. But we're working to bring everybody back together now, and I need your help to get Isaiah and the Joint Religious Leadership Coalition to make this a priority. We're going to be there on the first day of session with our allies. You all are invited 10 to 12 p.m., 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. in the rotunda. We're going to welcome back the legislators, and we're told that in the House they intend to pass this in February. They wanted us there on the first day. They plan to pass it in February. And then, you know, the arguments about the language, and then finally to get it through. It's still a process. We are so close now. We've never been closer to equality in this state. Any other questions?
I think we have time for one more, if there is
One more.
one. Well, one thought that occurred to me, Betty, is I think the last time you were talking to us about this, I was under the assumption that my legislator is already on board. And so I was thinking about your comment a little bit earlier about there's a role for everybody. And so I found out that my legislator, sure, is a yes, but it also is in a position to decide when it gets considered and so on. So maybe you could talk about that, even if we're confident of the position of our legislators, what roles there are to play.
Good question, Gretchen. And just so you know, there's a big difference between supporting and championing, and I talked about that earlier, about all the years that it was laid dormant. Your legislator is Majority Leader Jamie Long. I want you to know that I met with Jamie Long for a half an hour on the last day of session. He invited me alone into his office and said, we're going to pass this in 2024. And he is the gatekeeper for what goes on to the House floor. However, tepid response, didn't push it, let it pull back for a moment. I understand why, but we need to keep the pressure on there. And let's see, what else can I say about that? Just that it's going to take all of us to push it over the finish line. That's the deal. They need to hear from us. They need to hear from your children. They need to hear from your grandchildren. We need to get multi-generational. We need to get diverse communities walking forward together to make this happen. So thanks very much, everybody. I appreciate your time. God bless.
Thank you so much, Betty, for sharing both your experience and expertise and also helping us see where we might play a role in this. So next Sunday, we are going to welcome Shelley Carthen Watson, who is the president of the Downtown YWCA, Minneapolis. They are a community partner with us at Westminster, and she'll be speaking on new directions for the YWCA and plans for deepening community engagement. And we look forward to seeing you all then.
Thank you. Thank you.